Senator, there's so much to talk about. I can keep bringing up more issues. Another one that's in the political crosshairs nationally is the issue of immigration. And we're impacted by it so dramatically here, being on the border. So I'd like to turn it over to Carla to ask you a few questions on that area.
Well, Senator, as you know, President Obama was here in town last week, and that was one of the main topics of the discussion. And we just wanted to ask you, what is your vision about immigration? We are in the border here, and we are very impacted by that topic.
Well, let's take a poll. You know, I used to like polls when I was in the business. So at this table, who's an immigrant? Raise your hand. I would say every person here is an immigrant at some level, at some point in their history. And Eleanor Roosevelt used to say, we are all the sons and daughters of immigrants. When you go to Ellis Island in New York and you look there and here comes ships full of Irish in 1830, they are leaving a famine where they really don't have anything to eat. They're coming to New York and they are in this new world, and they go to places like Boston where immediately they're discriminated against by those that view them as being not equals to them. It is some decades later that one of them runs for President of the United States, and his name is John Kennedy. Those are Irish. That's Boston. It's 1830. Go into the Midwest when it's folks from Sweden, again, issues relating either to politics or food or the ability to survive, and they go into the Midwest and they become the farmers and the shopkeepers of the Midwest. They are Germans, they're Swedes, they're Norwegians, and now they're the ones that are the immigrants in places like Minnesota. Come here to this great community in the 1910s and 20s when the railroad is being pushed through in 1880 and later, and you go into downtown El Paso and there's a whole community of Chinese Americans who have come largely from the south to the north, and they built the railroad in this country. We are a nation of immigrants whose great fortune to attract the best and brightest of the world has been one of the great stories of the world, that America is a place that everyone wanted to go. Einstein, one of the great minds of his century, was an immigrant. You look at folks like Rupert Murdoch, who I'm not going to say I'm close to personally, but he's an immigrant from Australia. You look at each one who's made a contribution that came from another place. Why? Because we laid out this hope that in America you can be the best that you can be. We're a meritocracy, and whether you're here as a Chinese American or a Mexican American or a Swedish American, if you work hard, if you get the best education, you have a bit of luck, you can be anything you want to be. That's really the story of America, right? And so what's happened now? As with the 1830s and the Irish, the 1870s when this country and a group called the Know-Nothings attacked Catholics and Italians and Germans and said, we're not going to give you even the right to vote. In the 1920s, the attacks on Chinese Americans, 1940s on Japanese Americans, they were interred with no good reason. Now it's Mexican Americans and Nicaraguan Americans and Honduran Americans whose color of skin happens to be a little different from those that happen to be in power today in Austin. And they're being used as scapegoats. They're being assigned negative attributes. They're being called those people. In fact, they are us. So the question is, how do we evolve a system that lets us both protect our borders, have a security that any nation wants to have, whether it's Mexico or Guatemala or Canada, the United States, but honor the work of those that have come and make a way for them to become citizens after they have entered a system that makes them American citizens. Ronald Reagan led that fight during his presidency. It happened on his watch. In Canada, they have a system not based on a quota, what country you're from, but based on what can you offer this great country? What is the work that you can do here, whether as an engineer or a laborer in the oil sands of Alberta? And so there's major reforms that have to happen in the immigration system, but we need to do it now. Why do we go through a political era when it's okay in Texas for my friend and colleague Leo Berman, who thinks very differently from me, to try and pass a bill that asks every principal to ask a first grader for his citizenship papers? Do you know they're doing that in Austin? Those are bills that are live today. Another bill that if you had a wreck on the freeway, you had to prove your citizenship before you could be treated in the hospital, or the ambulance even take you to the hospital. Did you know that was happening in Austin today? These are very, very negative, racist political statements being made because the absence of leadership on the other side to solve what the challenge is. And the challenge is you've got an immigration system that needs to be worked and fixed. Mexico just did it. Mexico did it in 6 months. They started with a nativist, racist, early stage divisive argument in Mexico, and they evolved into an immigration system based on humans migrating to places of opportunity to get work, and how were we going to have a system where we evolved it based on the need for labor in this great country of ours, Mexico, and then how are we going to have security in Mexico to know who's here and what we need to get done. They did it. They did it in 6 months. Mexico laid out the cards now for the hemisphere. Canada's had a workable immigration system for 20 years. It is the United States that has not done the work yet. So President Obama was exactly right to make that an issue now and to bring it up. To those cynics that say, well, he's just doing it because it's election time, I would say, bull. He tried to do it at the beginning of his presidency and didn't have the votes to bring it up. He didn't have the votes because some Democrats wouldn't move it forward with him, and certainly all the Republicans were saying, we're going to draw this line around security until you satisfy us. I know some of these folks very well. I've been in politics with them for 20 years. There will never be a case where you can tell them the border's safe, no matter what you do. You can take them to statistics today. We've tripled the size of the Border Patrol. There are fewer crossings that have been in the last 20 years, and they'll say, well, the border's still not safe. And at the end of the day, there's no perfect border security system. It's just the best that you can do based on your country's willingness to solve a problem. That's where we are today.